This is a video about the most crucial, yet most overlooked element in global dominance. It's the explanation some nations lag behind, while others surge forward. Why the world displays such unequal distribution of prosperity and influence. Each year, more and more individuals are questioning American deterioration, perhaps from anxiety, perhaps from anticipation. Yet what none of it addresses is that on a planet so unpredictable, so diverse, so vast, the physical terrain beneath our feet represents the ultimate limitation on what options a country possesses. Why is China approaching that? Why hasn't Africa advanced? Why is that location on the map constantly experiencing difficulties? Every characteristic of terrain can be advantageous, disadvantageous, or neutral for the country that controls it. The big expansive area extending from Moscow to Warsaw represents a disadvantage for Russia. It's challenging to protect Germany, and Napoleon marched their forces right through here. The Himalayas on China's western frontier turn out to be neutral, providing protection from countries on the opposite side, but preventing China overland passage to the Indian Ocean, drastically limiting trade and military possibilities. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the Mississippi River Basin contains more navigable miles of river than the rest of the world combined, providing the U.S. a major abundance of food and an inexpensive method to transport it. Examine all these kinds of characteristics across every country, and the arrangement of the world falls into place. So let's engage in an exercise. The first known humans evolved out of Southeast Africa, gradually spreading out across the world as they established themselves in the 6 cradles of civilization. Societies: Olmec in Mexico, Caral in Peru, Nile in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus in India, Yellow River in China. You understand what every country desires: to be at peace, growing prosperous for as long as feasible. One of these original civilizations performed far superior than the rest, with the result largely predetermined by the characteristics of terrain surrounding them. Understanding that, which would you select to start as? Food is essential. A population can't expand without it. You'll naturally desire fresh water, something dependable and abundant. Individuals and your crops rely on it. A natural obstacle would be appreciated, something invading forces would struggle with. For those that stated the Nile, inform them what they've secured. Bob, you secured the prize. Yes, the 138 pyramids constructed in early Egypt weren't an accident. You require stability for that, and the Nile was the most stable society the world has ever witnessed. For 3 predictable explanations. 1, it possessed the superior river, most dependable, and not flooding to a degree that periodically it eliminates 10% of your population, making it straightforward to cultivate food. 2, the flatness of the river made it straightforward to transport items from the upper region down to the coast. And 3, the individuals floating down along the river and residing by it barely had to consider an invading force, because the desert on either flank was the world's superior defense against the militaries at the time. No one desires to march across that much desert today, much less 4,000 years ago. Egypt, the final of the 6 societies to remain standing, lasted 3,300 years. The invasion of Egypt, eliminating the final of them, initiated the great global transformation. As the world's population began to surge, advancing from 200 million in year 0 to 500 million by 1500, becoming substantial enough that individuals were genuinely starting to collide with one another, desiring that superior opportunity, merging and dividing. Europe representing one enormous revolving conflict. China's kingdoms warring, Japan warring, Africa warring. By 1800, 1 billion, 1945, 3 billion. And then suddenly the mathematics transformed. Are we genuinely going to invade them? What if they possess nuclear weapons? Borders started being redrawn much slower than the previous 2,000 years. Earth's geography lottery, what it blessed and cursed nations with, became locked in. Starting with the United States as possessor of Earth's most enviable landmass, stretching 1/4 of the distance down the globe. Glaciers from the previous ice age carved profound canyons into the edge of the terrain. They blanketed profound canyons on coastline. Or what generates natural deepwater ports? One does not simply create a deepwater port all over Europe. Natural ports all over North America, natural ports providing Europe, whose ports practically didn't freeze in the winter, by far the superior ship design and navies of the period. Ships and navies that could depart the ports of Europe, but then also easily land and keep landing in the natural deepwater ports of North America, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, rapidly establishing highly productive settlements they utilized as a foothold to advance westward across North America. Ports, individuals. The terrain along the East Coast? Excellent. But that was not what cemented the United States into an inevitable superpower. It was the Louisiana Purchase, a legal guarantee that no other European power would colonize or explore this area of terrain. It was purchased for $340 million in today's currency. But what would that piece of terrain be valued today? I mean, it's a genuinely priceless section of the United States. There is no scenario under which America would sell the middle of the country. But if you had to establish a dollar value for it, it's valued at least $60 trillion. And I personally think that's somewhat conservative. But 60 trillion that would represent a 17,640,000% increase on the purchase price. Thomas Jefferson, securing the crown of probably the superior investment anyone ever has executed. So attempt as intensely as you can, and it would still be extremely challenging to overstate the importance of the Mississippi Basin. It's the superior farmland the world has ever witnessed. It's all connected via a network of very flat, navigable rivers. As I stated earlier, it contains more navigable miles of river than the rest of the world combined. But then it empties out into the protected Gulf of Mexico, providing the U.S. an outlet into the ocean from the middle of the country. France understood completely what they were selling. They understood the terrain was so beneficial, they sold it to the U.S. to disadvantage England. They'll regret this forever, the authority of the United States. And they have provided England a competitor who sooner or later will humble her pride. France being at conflict with Britain, the currency was part of it. But the sale did in fact guarantee that in a couple of brief centuries, the U.S. would surpass Britain by a substantial margin, building on the strong foundation in the East. The U.S. utilized it to displace Spain and connect the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, forming the greatest military defense still today that exists 3,000 miles between the constantly warring Europeans and 4,500 miles from Asia. This Great Blue Buffer represents the primary explanation. The U.S. is the only highly developed country that hasn't had to reconstruct over the previous 150 years. Excellent. The U.S. possesses all this valuable terrain. But here's where it all converges relative to what the power games nations engaged in. The great game, as some describe it, is largely grounded in what the terrain under each country permits them to do relative to other countries. So here are 4 very specific examples of how major countries lack the geographic authority of the United States. China possesses access to just one ocean, the Pacific, and that access is blocked by the Philippines, Japan, and Taiwan, and the rest of the countries that border the South China Sea. All mostly unfriendly to China, which historically has left the country in a disadvantageous position in times of conflict. All of its trade passes within an easy strike distance of an unfriendly country, and 80% of its oil travels through the Malacca Strait, a very narrow choke point. So for the previous 2 decades and tens of billions of dollars, China has been working extremely intensely to secure overland access to a second ocean. The Indian Ocean, attempting to connect the Karakoram Highway to a deep-water port in southern Pakistan and rail and pipeline over the western mountains off the coast of Myanmar. These are the only 2 methods China may ever be able to operate a truck from within its borders and load the cargo it carries onto a ship, making China's military precision, offensive and defensive, relatively inferior compared to the expansive ocean access provided by the Atlantic, Gulf and Pacific coasts of the U.S., 4 times the magnitude of Europe, the second largest continental population after Asia. Africa's potential has been so elevated for so long that the struggle of the continent to feel the country able to advance through the global rankings appears to defy logic. Massive natural resource wealth, but the rivers, the coast is all functioning against the continent. Nobody has ever navigated the Congo River from top to bottom. 1,600 miles from the headwaters, it reaches the Atlantic Ocean here. Right here is where everyone who's attempted has abandoned. 10 miles long at 4.5 miles wide, and scattered with 20-foot standing waves, building-sized rocks and whirlpools that appear like they're from a cartoon 90 miles from where the river encounters the ocean. Rapids marks the conclusion of the Congo. River, in its usefulness to Congo's position in the world, H.M. Stanley of Dr. Livingston, I presume, after attempting to navigate the whole thing but abandoning at Inga Rapids, called it an immense tragedy. Depriving the entire interior of Central Africa 2/3 the magnitude of mainland U.S. from the thing that all great powers require to become and remain great, a dependable flow of water that permits boats to travel from the interior of the country to the ocean. If you were to remove all the ground so you could witness the Congo River from the side, how it descends from its headwaters to where it reaches the ocean, this massive step is disclosed. This is the Mississippi. For comparison, a boat-friendly paradise. But even if the Congo was as flat as the Mississippi, it would encounter one of the worst stretches of terrain on the entire planet for natural deep-water harbors. Untouched by glaciers, the coast of Africa is remarkably smooth. A few jagged indentations, too smooth. You perceive how the Chesapeake Bay is all jagged like this. It is perfect for trade, but these don't genuinely exist on the coast of Africa. The continent possesses 20% of all the terrain on the planet. But because the coast is so smooth, very few indentations, it contains less than 5% of the world's coastline. Europe possesses 7% of the terrain, 16% of the coastline. But to make things more challenging, the smoothness doesn't accomplish much too slow or break up the energy of the open ocean like a jagged coast does. It collides into the continent, generating one of the most powerful ocean currents in the world, extremely close to shore currents that sweep up the sediment west. Africa's two rivers bring to the ocean and distribute it out into any indentation where it can fit, like the few natural harbors Africa does possess, which makes the task of keeping African ports open deep enough for large ships, free from sandbars and shoals that are constantly forming, drifting. Reforming dredging perpetually is a Sisyphean task that was impossible to accomplish before sophisticated machinery. Africa never stood a chance to be one of the premier continents for trade once the oceans became the method goods are moved around the world. Russia sits in the middle of two crushing geographic puzzles. The first is what we're witnessing in Ukraine. This area of terrain is so flat that it keeps Russia's generals awake at night. Not once, but twice over the previous 200 years, a European force has marched right up to Moscow. Napoleon captured it. But even if Russia did control that whole stretch of terrain, it still lacks the thing any genuine superpower must possess: multiple deep warm water ports that are attached to its mainland. To reach the Atlantic, Russia either has to utilize its one port in the north of the country, travel through the choke point of the Baltic and through the Danish Straits, or down through Turkey, through the Mediterranean and out into the Atlantic. This is why Russia absolutely adores the idea of the polar ice caps melting a little bit further. If the north coast of Russia can remain warm enough for year-round operations, its north coast becomes a bastion of deep-water ports the length of its north coastline, which is extremely long. Russia's involvement in the Middle East is in part to gain permanent access to a warm water port. They had their attention on the same port in Pakistan that China is currently attempting to link to when they invaded Afghanistan in the 1970s, very comfortable with Syria. On the western shore of the Mediterranean, now perhaps, Putin appreciates the Syrians, but more likely because the Assad regime had been for decades, granting Russia complete and total access to their one major port, a wonderfully strategic location right above the Suez Canal. Russia's ships are permitted to come and go as they please. And yes, England, the textbook case of how technology can transform everything. One of the explanations it was a world superpower for so long was because it's an island 360-degree access to the ocean. It possessed a natural gap between constantly warring Europe and easy access to the flow of world trade. But this was the day Britain's fate was sealed. And here's the giant armada Hitler launches at England. Aircraft transformed the mathematics from hours to slowly advance across the English Channel, and bay by boat to 30 minutes for hundreds of bombers to be over downtown London. That made Britain susceptible once again to be invaded by only state one more time, constantly warring Europe. From that point forward, the security of the US, surrounded by its two oceans, made keeping resources in US dollars instead of the British pound, obviously a safer option. The reserve currency switched, causing resources to flow out of Britain and into the US. There were other things leading up to Britain's decline, but the arrival of the Air Force was the decisive nail in the coffin. Napoleon was correct. On a scale of 1 to 10, only one country today ranks at 10 for the 3 most important questions. Can you feed your population? Can you be invaded? Can you trade? Everything else builds on that: politics, the economy, culture. It all must sprout from the terrain upon which it establishes. That does not signify it's the only or single determining factor. Not at all. But it is the point to start from. So when we inquire, is America in decline? The first mention of American decline that I could discover was back in 1930. Yet here we are, almost 100 years later, because the idea that the US is going to spontaneously collapse ignores the thing that's guided human civilization since the beginning of time, until something about the terrain underneath the nation transforms. That country's position of authority in the world is unlikely to transform. Organic food keeps expanding, but less than 1% of US farmland is certified organic. That's where Farmland LP, the sponsor of today's episode, enters. Since 2009, they've been purchasing conventional farmland in California and the Pacific Northwest and transforming it with organic and regenerative farming practices, crop rotations, cover crops, restoring habitat, farming the method it should be. So after the successful launch of 2 prior funds, they're now raising capital for their third, providing accredited investors the opportunity to add farmland, a real asset that produces food, restores ecosystems, and builds long-term value to their portfolio. Check out the link in the description to learn more. Retriclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses,